Act 1, Scene 6, and perhaps a slightly shorter scene that breaks up that very intense action that we've just seen between Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. And we see here Duncan, the king, arriving with the Scottish lords and their attendants to Macbeth's castle, ready for the celebratory feast. Duncan praises the castle and its pleasant environment, and he thanks Lady Macbeth, who's emerged to greet him, for her hospitality. She interestingly replies that it's her duty to be hospitable, since she and her husband owe so much to the king. Duncan then asks to be taken aside to Macbeth, whom he says he loves dearly. And remember the irony, he talked about the previous saying of Cawdor as a gentleman in whom he placed absolute trust. And we see that transference of that trust straight onto Macbeth. This is ironic given what we as the audience have just seen with the conversation between Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, where they've just plotted to kill him. So we already see Duncan misplacing his trust once again. And this scene is important. Although it's short, it contextually reminds us how significant being asked to host a royal visit is. It's the highest honour that a household could have, and it solidifies your status and power amongst the other nobles. It's an honour that is desired, as when the king arrives or when he would visit a household, there's the potential for money and power and land. However, there are very, very strict protocols for housing a royal party. There's feasting, entertainment, copious amounts of alcohol, of course, are an absolute must. And therefore, whilst it is an absolute honour, it's also a very expensive thing to be part of. Looking more closely at this section of text then, we can see the beautiful environment this castle is situated in. Duncan remarks that the castle hath a pleasant seat, as in the views are stunning, and he talks about the air being sweet. And Banquo agrees. If we look at the next purple quotes, where he says, "The heaven's breath smells wooingly here, and the air is delicate." And so both Banquo and Duncan are noting how heaven-like this castle is. Banquo, and look at the quotes in green here, talks about the birds that are there. The temple-haunting martlet, the martin bird, makes its nest there and creates life. And this contrasts very much to the last scene where Lady Macbeth talks about the raven himself and that harbinger of death. So she notices the death-like birds, whereas as Duncan and Banquo arrive, they note the birds that we associate with spring and beginnings and new life. And so it's quite an interesting juxtaposition to what we've already seen. But certainly Duncan and Banquo at this point in the play are seeing the castle as heaven-like. Very, very important, because very quickly we're going to see the castle portrayed in a very different way. Lady Macbeth enters onto the stage to greet the king and his attendants and the other Scottish nobility. And Duncan remarks that she is an honoured hostess. He calls her, again, fair and noble hostess. And so he's really elaborating here on how respected she is as a lady of the Scottish court. And Lady Macbeth stresses that in all their service, in every point twice done and then double done. So she is reassuring Duncan that they are excited about his visit and that they have been frantically checking the castle to make sure everything's perfect. However, if we just unpick that language slightly, again, we see that link between her and the witches with this idea of being twice done and then double done. It's reminiscent of what we've heard the witches chanting in earlier scenes. It also, this idea of being twice done and double done is perhaps indicating her duplicitous nature, the fact that things are being done and then done again maybe slightly differently, the idea that actually she isn't everything that she seems. And Duncan ends this very, very short scene with this idea of being conducted to his host because he loves him highly and will continue our graces towards him. So he's pointing out that at this point in the play, he is very affectionate towards Macbeth and that he wants to continue to honour him for everything that he has done. So despite it being a really, really short scene, it is important to make sure that you've nailed down the overarching ideas that we see there. Stick with it, draw with it, imagine it, write it, analyse it. Draw it. You could create a pictogram featuring Banquo and Duncan's arrival at the castle with Lady Macbeth greeting them, remembering to surround the castle with those quotations that show its heavenly presence in this quite dark opening of the play. Imagine it. How would you actually direct this scene? It's an interesting scene because it is so short, but how would you get those ideas to come through? How would you have those characters on stage? How would you have them interact? Would you make full use of the balcony, for example? Would you have Lady Macbeth appear from a height as if she's been stood on the battlements waiting? Or would you have her on the stage with them? How would you have them enter? Thinking about those sorts of things can really begin to get you to unpick the deeper meaning behind the ideas. You could write it and perhaps flip it on its head. So imagine your Banquo. You've been with Macbeth in battle. You've been with Macbeth while he has heard the prophecies. You've had your own prophecies. We know that Macbeth wrote to Lady Macbeth because we see her reading the letter. Perhaps maybe Banquo has decided to write a letter to his wife. How would that read? Would it be similar to or different from the letter that Macbeth has clearly written? You know, what does he feel about arriving there? How does he feel about Macbeth at this point in the play? I think there's some really interesting ideas that you could unpick if you look at the first 5 scenes from Banquo's point of view. Remember to only include detail that he would know. He wouldn't know any of the conversation from Act 1, Scene 5, so you'd have to find a way to avoid that. Or again, analyse it, a nice little mini essay, it's probably actually only maybe 1 or 2 paragraphs this time, with how does Shakespeare present Macbeth, the Macbeth castle as an inviting place, drawing out those ideas of the language used to describe it as a place of life and of birth and of heaven-like qualities.